Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and, with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Arg, mateys. Angus McGregor and his Bonnie Lass are here. Tonya and Joey Madia are returning tonight. They are premier paranormal researchers, authors, children's book readers, and KGRA hosts and guests all over many other networks. Tonya and Joey were guests with us earlier this year to discuss their Watch Out for the Hallway, which chronicles their 2-year paranormal investigation of the Webb Memorial Library in Beaufort, North Carolina. And they are back to discuss their just published Roommates from Beyond. And Joey recently published the first part of his Canon in the Quill series. So we're going to get into other projects they're working on. So we have 2 hours to absorb a lot of information from our fascinating guests. Hi, Tonya and Joey. How are you?
Hi, Mark. It's so good to be back again. Thank you.
Yes, it's great to be back.
Yeah. We're very glad you're here. So, I think maybe we should start off with, like the Canon in the Quill. Maybe because it deals with beach imagery. I think as we get closer to Thanksgiving, maybe a lot of us need to warm up, have some warm thoughts. So maybe we can start there. Joey, this is part 1, right?
Yeah. So it's book 1. It's it's part of a larger universe called the Stanton Chronicles, but it's book 1, and actually book 2 should be coming out hopefully within a couple of weeks. The graphic designer is finishing up the cover, but the book itself is all typeset and ready to be printed. So yeah, and they'll go on for maybe infinity. I don't know. It's fun to write. So, it's really fun to write.
Okay. So the first book was really enjoyable. If people like the Waverly, like Sir Walter Scott's Waverly novel. Some of the like Highlander, the movie, Marathon Man, and like all that political intrigue in a lot of different locations around the world. This would be a great book for people, you have settings in the Scottish Highlands and Scone Palace, the Tuileries Gardens of Paris, Bahamas, London, colonial America, and present-day New Jersey. So, what were you aiming to achieve with all these locations? And what's the time frame?
Right. So the time frame is the start of the golden age of piracy. So it's the mid teens of the 1700s. So the story begins in 1715. So the aim of the different places is I grew up loving and writing. So I have a fantasy novel called Jester Knight. Sequel to that comes out next year sometime, probably in the spring. But I love, if people are fans of Game of Thrones or any other kind of serial work where you have numerous story threads. And really, there's a lot of misinformation about the golden age of piracy, just like there is. I'm kind of the paranormal and pirates guy, and at first glance, or when people first hear that, they go, "Wait a minute! Like, what do they have in common?" And that time period was full of superstition. There was lots of paranormal. There was the Obeah religion, which is similar to voodoo but different, that came out of the Gold Coast of Africa, that was tied to the slave trade, and of course spread out through the Caribbean and through the American colonies and all of that. A lot of maritime superstitions, but it really was a time where global politics was, all the families of Europe were interconnected, and they fought like your typical family, brothers and sisters. The War of Spanish Succession has just ended when the first novel begins, and that's because the King of Spain, Philip, had a legitimate claim on the throne of England. But you had problems with Protestants and Catholics. So you have all these different great layers that go so far beyond pirates getting drunk on rum and blowing holes in boats with cannon. That was not what was going on at all. It was a very fascinating time in world history.
And I like how you get a little scene here with Rob Roy, and then you switch over to something going on in Fontainebleau, and then like the next chapters in colonial America. You have these intriguing plots developing, and the ramifications across the Atlantic, but I'm looking forward to part 2.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, I think this is a very interesting time that we're living in right now, of course, as far as American history. And people always say, oh, what happened to America? America's changed so much. I would say that it really hasn't. Like a lot of the way government is structured and the philosophies behind American government and just the psychology of America was very much the founding fathers. But you can go back 50 years to the golden age of piracy and see where those seeds were laid, right? The European interest in the Americas and of course the Scotch-Irish influence is huge here. It's a huge part of America's identity. So that's really what I was going for. But I'm super glad that you enjoyed it. And the second book becomes, I kind of eased everyone into the paranormal, but the books get increasingly paranormal as we go. So that's something to look forward to. Yeah, thank you, Mark.
Okay, and before we get into the heavy duty stuff, there are a couple passages I need to ask you about. Okay, one of the characters is Jake, the podcaster. Obviously, he's the present day New Jersey character But yeah, you say that he has a couple groupies on his podcast. Are any of them named Mermaid Lisa or the Red Dragon Rider? Maybe even Julianne.
I'm not. He doesn't say. Jake doesn't tell me these things. He hoards his fans. So it could very well be.
All right. Well, yeah. I just wonder if so some of my friends are also somehow being teleported to your book. We'll see how that plays out in part 2.
Yeah. Well, Jake gets into some very heavy stuff. So in book 2, he's not doing any podcasting. We don't want to give too much away.
Okay.
But Jake is like Frodo. I love that the average, mild-mannered person gets pulled into massively huge affairs where they're over their head, and we can really root for them because they're like us. That's what Jake winds up in the second book. So, little teaser there.
Okay. All right. And on page 9, Christine says she wondered why she agreed to appear on Jake's podcast. I hope that's not autobiographical, and you didn't write that after your first appearance on Nightlight.
No. I actually first drafted that prior to even Hallway coming out. So we did not did not know you at the time, I can assure you. Yeah, no.
Okay, a little bit of relief. See, I actually do read this stuff.
You do?
Okay.
Yeah, word for word. And you read into it, too.
Okay, yeah, 10 years of college are paying off now.
There you go.
Okay, so back to the more serious stuff. You start off the series with a captivating chapter with Devin Ross being involved with the dehumanizing slave trade.
Right.
That's where we get. I don't want to jump too far ahead of myself, but okay, let's start there because this concept of the slave trade in 1715 that theme reappears throughout the book, with other types of slavery, such as being a corporate slave to hide information.
Mm-hmm.
Getting people involved in, like a mind control type thing. Angus being sent to the Americas. It's kind of a variation of breaking up a family, but you are establishing that really no one is absolved from what that some type of influence. Can you explain a little bit more about this opening chapter? It's you handle it really well.
Yeah. So again, I'll give you a little hint. Like I said, the series is open-ended. I'm going to do a book maybe every 8 or 9 months because it's such a big story to tell. So it begins where it ultimately ends, is all that I'll say. So you have this slave trade, which is fascinating in and of itself, because we all grew up learning about the slave trade, right? And the slaves came from Africa, and we knew that. Well, it was the warring tribes in Africa that would capture rival tribesmen, and they would sell them to the English and the Dutch and the prevalent slave traders. So that's an interesting point. And then that's very astute, Mark. Throughout the whole book, because one of Angus's friends that he meets in Boston, he rescues him from a life of indentured servitude, right? His father goes into debt, into a sea captain, and in trade, his teenage son has to go and work for him. And people taking passage from Europe to the Americas, they would pay that off under horrible conditions. And that really, that went through even into the 18 and 1900s. Tonya and I lived in West Virginia and still have many close ties there, mining industry. The Italians would come over to New York, and the coal agents would meet them. And they spoke hardly any English, and they would convince them to get on these trains, and they would take them down to West Virginia, and then they would be stuck. And you weren't paid. You were given what was called company scrip. So you lived in company housing, and you used the script that was only good at the company store, so it guaranteed that you would never get ahead. So that's just another form of slavery. And then you're right, the whole corporate slavery and mind control and giving up your will to the higher source. So it's very prevalent through the story. And these pirates are, sometimes people say to me, because I've been doing this pirate education and a one-man pirate show that's toured everywhere and all for about 5 years now. And they say, every once in a while, somebody will say, you really glorify these guys who were bullies and cutthroats and thieves. Some were. But it was really a precursor for the American Revolution. It was a rehearsal for the American and French Revolutions, right? There were articles that the pirates signed. A captain could be voted in or out. There's the second book revolves around a character or a historical figure named Samuel Bellamy. And Sam was called the Robin Hood of the Seas. And he had all stripes of people in his crews. So he freed slaves. So if they caught a slave ship and there were slaves on it, they had the opportunity to go on the cruise. So it's a good practice, especially in a big series, to begin with the prevalent themes. And that scene in Africa with the slave traders and with the chief of the tribe encapsulates all of that.
Okay. And towards the end of the first chapter, there's you introduce the theme of Jumbi.
Yes, the Jumbi, yeah.
Later on, once some of the secret society information is presented, there's like almost another version of the same paranormal theme. I don't know if that's the right word, but it's something similar. Going on in London. I thought that was you draw our attention to what people really aren't that different. It's like they're doing some of these same type of supernatural practices.
Right. And so I'm really playing with an idea, and this is where we start to close the gap between my fiction and the very real work that Tonya and I do, and the work that you're very interested in and promote on your show. It's this idea that are demons are they manifestations of concrete ideas and intentions. So historically, the idea of Mammon, right, Mammon, who's similar to Moloch, but a little different. Mammon is the personification of greed. So these sort of early multinational companies, which is what the East India Trading Company was, the Royal Africa Company, which is the primary company that revolves around Canada. And they ran, and the Dutch had their own versions. These big trading companies, all the way through the Opium Wars with China and all of that, centuries later, they ran these countries. They were the power behind the countries. And not that we want to go too far down the conspiracy theory road, but, there are ideas of the Illuminati and the international bankers that exist today. And they very much worship this entity named Mammon that represents greed. And that absolutely fascinates me. So all I did with these books is I had an opportunity to go, well, what if it was actual real? Where it became this winged demon that fed on sacrifices, right? Which, if you think of Fritz Lang's Metropolis, Moloch, the eater of babies, right, in the Bible. So this idea that people sacrifice their life to this corporate greed, I think is a very fascinating subject. And so I have this great palette of this series to explore that.
Yeah, it's really well done, and later on, you introduce Blackbeard as a character, and is it Lieutenant Maynard is introduced as well. So it's at some point they're gonna have a meeting in book 2 or 3. So
they don't meet again probably until book 5. That's where they have their big historical meeting. Yeah. But I wanted to introduce Maynard way early on, because he was a failure. I mean, even after he assassinated Blackbeard in 1718, he didn't make captain for another 10 years. Like, he was not a good officer, but he's known as killing Blackbeard. So it's sort of this infamous, Robert Ford killing Jesse James, right? Or John Hinckley, or people like that, or we're coming up on the 40th anniversary of the death of John Lennon, and these guys that are known for assassinating well-known, successful, accomplished people. So I wanted to get Maynard way in there so that we could see his slow development into the man who lied about the circumstances of what he did. So, yep.
Okay. Well, cool. It's you have a terrific start to your book. I don't want to give away too much of it, since but I'd highly recommend it. It is really a lot of fun. Yeah, it's not that long of a book. Yeah, it's well worth the read.
Thank you.
Yeah, and is there anything else you want to say about it, or you just want to kind of move on to?
Yeah, just say that it's available on Amazon, and the second book will be available in about 2 weeks.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, and we'll give another plug. To pick up all the rest of your publications at Amazon as well. But let's see. Yeah. Maybe a little. Might need both of your help for Barbara and me to understand an event from about 6 weeks ago. This would be a little transition to a little bit more of the paranormal aspect of tonight's show. But when we had Reverend Bill McDonald on it was a great show. After the archive became available, Barbara's telling me, did you go out and like run a marathon and leave, the microphone open? It's like, there's this heavy breathing on the archive.
Wow.
And it's like, but it wasn't there during the live show.
Wow.
And then there was like, did someone call in? Check the Skype call, and there's only would have been the three of us when Barbara called in after the show to thank him for being a guest. But there were only three people on the call, but there were four people registering.
Oh wow!
Do you have an explanation for how that could happen? It's like, did some entity follow Bill onto the show? I don't know how that works. Then they throw in like the technology aspect. Do you have an explanation for something like that? We don't know.
Well, I think that spirits certainly have the ability to manipulate technology, and I've actually had it happen myself. Oftentimes, I'll have video sessions with clients, and we will have that same type of thing where it'll be a voice or almost like an echo, but not the voice of either one of the person on the video call. And you'll hear just this voice just kind of coming in, or strange noises that come in. And certainly, with things like EVP, they're able to manipulate these devices and come through. So that's certainly one possibility in terms of what might have happened.
Mark, were you watching probably about 5 months ago? We did an episode of Into the Outer Realms, our weekly live stream, and we were announcing an appearance on Michael W. Hall's show. And there is, on the recording, you can hear a very animalistic growl that comes in out of nowhere. And a bunch of the listeners heard it and all. Well, when we were on Michael's show, when we got done, we had a really dark experience in our house with an entity. There was someone in the chat room. Michael never brought him up. We never paid him any mind. But he was typing in all caps. It looked like Sumerian or ancient Akkadian. It was really disturbing stuff, like the vibration coming off it. And we had one of the scariest nights that we've ever had in our lives. Because there was this weird entity that somehow had manifested through that whole experience. But that was 3 or 4 days after we had made the announcement and heard that growl in the line. So, and if you think about Keel, John Keel, right, the Fortean and of course Mothman researcher, he would talk about weird beeps, whistles, disturbances in the old analog phones, right? So I think those things are very and Reverend, the Reverend does some work with some pretty dark things. Am I right?
Oh, no, he has done exorcisms.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, he's Reverend Bill's going to be going into that, some near-death experiences when he's a guest with us in a couple weeks. Barbara and I have just been like, I don't know what that was all about. It was very odd.
Yeah, Tanya, do you remember the night when we were doing the web and we got the reservation for 16 people and then it disappeared
Yes.
and there was no record of it?
Yes.
Yeah, so Mark, like you had this phantom fourth person on the line. We had a reservation to do a tour at the web. It was 16 people. The notification, we were preparing to go, but we never got the confirmation. And then the next day, there was no record of it. No credit card record, no record on the phones, no record in the system that there were these 16 people. It was like a phantom party that was like an electronic blip that completely disappeared from layers and layers of, the booking system and the credit card cover, because we wouldn't get the notification until people paid. And that's a lot of money, 16 people to do that tour. So there are some similarities that we've experienced in different ways. Yeah.
Well, and what you and Tanya were saying about, the growl. I probably watched that live.
Yeah.
But where does stuff like that come from? If is it more prominent on the archive, or did people hear just on the archive? I don't know, that was where the situation on like this one Nightlight archive happened. No one noticed it during the live show. There's some kind of similarity. I just wondered if you would experience something like that, and Tanya agreed, and like, okay. I don't know what it was. It was just odd.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay, so maybe we have that resolved. With Reverend Bill about that in a couple weeks, but see if he figured out anything. But we'll just have to go with. It does happen. But anyhow, you do have another new book that is hot off the presses. It's Roommates from Beyond. It's also at Amazon, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Cool. Okay, so maybe we need to start off by defining who are the roommates.
So the roommates are generally ghosts or spirits or even other types of entities. We've even encountered fairies, little people. So really any kind of being or consciousness or sentient being really that's residing in the home.
Okay. So are these roommates ghost spirits that have been in the homes where you have occupied, or are they looking, or are you looking at a variety of haunted homes?
Great question. So it's a little bit of both. In the book, we talk about many of the homes that we've lived in, beings that we've encountered, as well as homes that we've been asked to come in and investigate.
Okay. So, do you feel like the new book is an extension, going into more detail from, watch out for the hallway?
With the new book, it's more like a handbook for how to navigate living in a home that is haunted. So a home that's having a lot of activity. Hallway is specifically about our investigation of the Webb Memorial Library. And there are some, experiences that we share in both books, but in Roommates from Beyond, we go into a lot more detail in terms of the homes that we lived in order to give an example of how we, not only what the manifestations were like, but how we navigated those experiences. Would you say that's about it, Hun, or would you expand on that?
No, I mean it's really so. The book is done in 4 parts, and it is very much a handbook. So the subtitle is How to Live in a Haunted Home. Now we chose home and not house purposely because a haunted house is a much different thing. We lived in a haunted house. We did an episode of Into the Outer Realms right before Halloween about the one haunted house that we lived in. But depending on what your threshold is, we enjoy having spirits and ghosts in our home. We like the paranormal activity. It's interesting to us. And yes, sometimes it gets dark. Sometimes it gets even a little bit dangerous. And we have prescriptions. But it's 4 parts. So there's sort of an introduction about how these things are becoming more prevalent. People are reporting this more. More people believe in life after death, near-death experiences, ghosts, spirits, UFOs, all of it. And we're also, in the past couple of years, seeing a big uptick of people who are experiencing dark things. So things coming in through mirrors or portals or things like that. Then the second part of the book is 7 or 8 homes that we've lived in and the different paranormal experiences that we had there. And as we were learning from people like Rosemary Ellen Guiley, so we weren't just passengers. So we don't want people to feel helpless because their home is haunted. And then we go into cases that we did in businesses, different organizations, historical museums, people's homes. And then we give remedies, ways to ward yourself, ways to keep your energy vibration high. And so we're really hoping, Hallway was sort of a room-by-room guided tour of this fabulous 2 years that we had, investigating one place, whereas Roommates, like Tonya said, is very practical for people. And we're really hoping that it'll help a lot of people.
Okay. One of the ideas that came to mind was, you're presenting this as cohabitating with the paranormal. Do you feel that when you move into whichever house you're talking about, were you moving into the ghosts or spirits already occupied habitation sites, or did the entity follow you from the last house? At some point, you two are cohabitating with the paranormal. How does that work? Were they already there?
I think in many of the homes that we've encountered ghosts, yes, they were already there. I think in our particular case, and I think this is true of a lot of people, myself and our daughter, as you know, are psychic mediums, and people who are either very sensitive or psychic tend to, or experiencers, people who've been lifelong experiencers, tend to act as batteries for certain locations. So we go to a new home, and, new or maybe an old home, and there's activity there. Maybe the other residents prior to us experienced a few strange happenings, but nothing, really out of the realm of the ordinary. And then we move in, and myself and our daughter, and actually our middle son to a certain extent is very sensitive as well. So here we are charging up the home, and all of a sudden we're having all of this activity. So, but, our experience has been most of the places that we've moved to, yes, they were already inhabited by, resident ghosts, or, as I mentioned, fairies, elemental type beings. Our current home is a really good example of this. This home was built in 1929. It's a Sears catalog home. And the first time I even came to look at the home to see if it was something that, would work for us, I was experiencing ghosts, and I saw a little boy in the upstairs closet in one of the bedrooms, and I also saw a gentleman in the basement who had a black suit on, and he was a very stoic-looking man. So I knew that there were two resident ghosts already, and then when we moved in, we got to know particularly the gentleman quite well, and discovered that he is actually the man who built the home. And I was getting his name, Frank, and Joey can tell you a little bit, too, about some of his encounters with Frank, but Frank really wasn't that happy to have Joey in some of the spaces of the home, and I'll let Joey talk to you a little bit about that.
Okay.
So, Frank was an old-fashioned guy. He was an Army veteran. He had spent a lot of time in Alaska. He had some very strong opinions culturally and things like that came up different places. But he really did not like modern technology. And as you know, we have I do audio drama, and I have all this fancy equipment for being on the radio, being on podcasts. And I would go, we have a converted sun porch on the back of the house that I set up as my studio, and we put in a beautiful wood floor, and I have all these nice sound panels. It's all decorated, and I collect collectible cars and figures, and people can see those things in the background of Into the Outer Realms. I love that kind of stuff, being a storyteller. And I would come into the room in the morning, and the little cars would be turned over on their roofs. Figurines would be knocked over. Things would be moved around and disordered. And it was his way of saying, I don't like you in my space. So that is I think that's where the idea for Roommates from Beyond really came into play, where Tonya and I said, in the movies, people have to move. They have to break their lease or abandon their house in the middle of the night. Well, that's not practical. So we have found ways to, like you said, cohabitate with the paranormal. And we've learned a lot of interesting things. And Jolie was always very good about it. She was always very good about setting boundaries and saying, don't touch my things, and don't come into my space, or it's okay if you come and see me, but not when I'm in the shower, not when I'm getting ready for bed, not when I'm sleeping. And John Keel, way back in the day, wrote these letters that are collected in these books about the Mothman experience. And he was writing to the families of the people who had seen the Mothman. And he was saying, I know this sounds absolutely insane, but speak to these entities and tell them to leave you alone. Tell them to stay out of your space. And as crazy an idea that was in the 1960s, we're hoping that it's becoming more mainstream now. And if we treat the dead with the same respect, with the same level of communication, with the same level of understanding and recognition that they have certain rights, I mean, the man built the house. So it's understandable that he has an attachment to it, right? But we're renting it now, and so we needed to come to some agreement. And Tonya can tell you about the process. She said she hit on a really nice process to negotiate with Frank and ultimately resolve the problem.
Yes. So
this sounds like an interesting story.
Oh, it is. Yeah, go ahead.
It really is. So Frank was, making himself known pretty regularly. And one night it just occurred to me, and oftentimes I would see him, like we'd be sitting in the living room watching television, and from the living room sofa you can look into the kitchen, and we'd always be hearing noises in the kitchen, just like things being moved around, just banging, just always noises coming from the kitchen. And I would look in, and not always, but frequently, I would see Frank in there. And one evening, he was just standing there looking at me. And I don't know if I just sort of picked up, like telepathically, what he was thinking or feeling, but it just occurred to me that he just wanted to be acknowledged and sort of like included. Because, we would be in the living room as a family watching television, and I think he was making all the noise. It just kind of occurred to me that maybe he's in there making all the noise because he just wants some attention. So I thought, well, I'm going to start just acknowledging him. I mean, not that we weren't acknowledging him, but acknowledging him in a way that was more inclusive. So when I made coffee in the morning, I would pour an extra cup and set it on the counter and say, "Hey, Frank, this is for you, good morning," and really just start talking to him like he was a member of the family, because at that point he really was. And that's what we mean by roommates from beyond, right? So I would do that, and, when I would make a meal, I would just set out a little bit extra, just a little tiny, like saucer-sized plate with some food on it, just as an acknowledgement. And I did that for about a month or so, and over time, all of the activity from Frank just sort of diminished. And actually, I think he may have moved on because we really have not been experiencing him.
Okay.
We have plenty of other roommates from beyond here in the house, but I haven't encountered Frank lately.
Okay, so Frank was the builder of the house. In your watch out for the hallway, Dr. Thompson owned one of the lots on which the Webb Library was built.
Correct.
Yes.
It seems to be like one of the. It's at the chapter start of chapter 7 of Hallway, but does the original owner of the property or builder of the house, is there a more is it more prevalent for the builder to linger after death than any other type of person that might have a connection to the property?
I will say, I don't know about more prevalent, but we do talk about another couple of cases that where we were asked to go in and investigate and try to solve a haunting or help manage it because the people who were living in the home could not do it on their own. And they lay very strong claim. There's one case in the book where it was multi-generational. So it was a father who built the home. His daughter lived there. And when he died, a woman not having many rights, his brother tried to lay claim to the land and the house. This woman walked 17 miles to and from the county courthouse to make her claim. So this is someone who was very, very strongly attached to the home. And so we need to figure that in. You can also go a step further, and the indigenous people who inhabited the land, or our house here in Ohio, in eastern Ohio, we got some help from beyond closing a portal, because the fairies that are attached to the land through a hawthorne tree that's on our property had opened a portal where they used to dance. And that was prior to when the house was built. Plus, also, I talked about coal mining in West Virginia. Well, there's so many ties between elementals in the old coal hollers and the old coal camps and things like that. So now you have these very ancient spirits that hold claim to land, and they can be some of the most powerful and hard to get rid of and nasty spirits. So that idea of ownership, right, even for the living, for us typical people, when we own something, we lay a strong claim to it, and if someone tries to take it away from us, we fight. So we have to factor that into the equation. We couldn't just banish Frank. We couldn't exorcise him or just burn a bunch of sage and say, go back where you came from and don't, because this is where he came from. So that becomes extremely important in the way it figures in. But yes, when we do encounter an owner, I will say that their attachment is very strong to the property.
Okay. It goes back to just like after having so many guests on talking about UFOs or whatever, there does become a pattern. It's just just interesting to see who is statistically represented as haunting the place, more often than other. I'm just kind of throwing that out. But you're also working on, the patterns book with our good buddy Steve.
Yep. Right.
And
yeah.
So, and that I'm looking forward to seeing what conclusions are reached there with the patterns. That is just something that just keeps coming up. Whether we're talking about UFOs or where mound sites are located.
Yeah.
Tonya, with in the number of homes you've occupied and some of your other investigations, do you see any difference between apartments and homes, since apartments are most likely smaller than a house? Is there a more concentrated energy in an apartment?
That's a great question. I would say I'm not so sure that it would be specifically because it was an apartment, because we've experienced concentrations of energies in all different types of locations and buildings. I will say I can't really to having ever lived in a haunted apartment. However, well, that's not true. The apartment that we lived in that we talk about in Roommates is really sort of more like to me, more like a townhouse kind of situation. But I I don't know. We were experiencing some activity in there. I don't know that our neighbors were, but I will say in our townhouse in Beaufort, our neighbors were experiencing the same activity that we were experiencing. So you're kind of in the same building, you know, you're under the same roof, so to speak, in the same structure, although it's separate residences. So I think that the opportunity for the activity to be happening in more than one residence is certainly there. So, like I said, we've had both experiences where in one townhouse situation, we didn't know of our neighbors experiencing anything, either that or they just weren't saying it. And then in the one in Beaufort, they were, you know, letting us know that they were experiencing pretty much the same activity that we were.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So if everyone's under one roof, it sounds like they're moving between in the different residences in like the townhouse you just discussed, or an apartment. You know, they can move. They're just kind of going from one residence to the next through the walls.
Through the walls, exactly, in the same way that they do in homes.
Okay, cool. And Tonya, did you just mention the Hawthorne Tree? Was that Joey?
I mentioned the Hawthorne Tree on our property. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That reminded me of in the hallway book where Tonya discussing a Cro-Magnon man and some kind of ancient person. He was working with plants. So that's on page 16. And trees are also nearby. I think it's interesting that in your research, vegetation, plants, there's some, all that factors into your research. What patterns are emerging with plants?
Well, certainly our house in West Virginia, the one where you were mentioning the Cro-Magnon man that came through a dream. So on that property, we had a portal, and the portal was in between two walnut trees. And whatever kinds of, I'm sorry.
Oh, there's a specific tree is mentioned again. I don't know. I just think that's a fascinating subject. We have walnut trees and hawthorn trees being mentioned.
Yes, and also sycamore trees. So,
Sherry Brake has discussed them as well. I think the Native Americans called them like ghost trees because of the white bark on them.
And they were also a good indicator of water. So help them locate good areas for water, and that was the case with the sycamore trees that grew on our property. We had a sweat lodge, and we had many ceremonies there, and after having the sweat lodge for a while, sycamore trees started to grow near where the sweat lodge was, and there was no water source there, so they really shouldn't have been growing there. We had a good friend who was a Shawnee chief, and he came to the property. And when he first visited our property, it was well after we had taken the sweat lodge down, but he immediately knew where it had been because he immediately noticed the sycamore trees. And he said, those shouldn't be there. That must be where you had your sweat lodge. And he said that the spirits were showing their gratitude for the ceremonies that you did there. So that was really awesome. But yes, the connection with trees and plants, I think that, plants are intelligent, and especially trees as well, intelligent, sentient beings. Certainly, they have lots of healing energies and, their own unique type of consciousness. I love to watch flowers. Sunflowers are a great example of this in the afternoon sun, the way that they turn their face toward the sun, So they have this innate intelligence in them as well. But, so there is a really unique sort of connection to these other realms and these interdimensional beings, whatever you might call them, and certainly nature and plants.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and with like a 400-year-old play like A Midsummer Night's Dream with fairies, like there are all kinds of plants and flowers mentioned in that. Interesting to realize that is Shakespeare or whoever wrote the play that at least 400 years ago people were aware of expressing like the folklore. Like we're just rediscovering it today.
Exactly.
Just right there throughout play. I think like foxgloves are mentioned, and quite. I'll have to dig up the play real fast and look at it. I don't know about Hawthorne and walnut tree specifically, but that might be just more of an American setting. But it's just really interesting to see how all these plants fit into these stories.
Mhm.
Okay. What? Let's see. What? Earlier today, just the segue into plants was was unexpected, welcomed but unexpected. But got started a little bit on Shakespeare. But earlier today, I asked Joey about what about an older poet like Dante in his portrayal of the afterlife. Is there anything, Joey? Do you think there's some patterns that Dante incorporated in the Divine Comedy that might have been something novel that was presented in the 1320s when it was published that maybe the paranormal researcher like you and Tonya or Brent, Steve, or just confirming now?
I I think so for a couple of reasons. And Dante Alighieri, of course, is complicated because he was a rebel against a faction in Italy. So a lot of what he did, the people, of course, that he populated the nine circles of hell with were enemies of his, right? And he was banished from Italy for a time and all those kinds of things. So he was working on multiple levels. I think the same way that St. John of Patmos, who wrote Revelation, he was working on. He was a rebel against the Roman, and he was isolated on the, sort of an expat on the island. But I also do think that they were tapping into things. So Dante's, the Purgatorio has become very interesting to me because Tanya and I have worked a couple of cases involving suicides, and they tend to show up back on Earth, as it were, after a period of time. So I do think that there's something to this purgatory, to this holding place, to this staging area, that depending on how your life went and how it ended, there is some form. Now, I don't necessarily know that it's religious where you have to do X amount of time there, then you go to heaven. But we have had some very compelling cases where there seems to be some confusion and some re-assimilation in about trying to make sense of what happened. It not that I'm inclined to suicide, but it really gives me pause that I think that there are some energetic debts to be paid or some energetic aspects. So I do think that when you look at the Purgatorio and the three, right, you look at, you look at hell, you look at purgatory, and you look at heaven, right, the Paradiso and all of that for Dante, he was tapped into something. I think the same way that St. John was, and they were working with myth, they were working with allegory, but it was based on something that may involve parallel dimensions, that may involve other communications. And I think other great writers, you mentioned Nathaniel Hawthorne to me. I think of Edgar Allan Poe. I think of the big cases, H.P. Lovecraft, right? They say maybe he was in contact with these things that he named the Elder Ones. So I do think that just like I work in fiction and nonfiction, I really think we need to study those things. That's a very astute observation that you came up with, that there is value in going back. I would love to revisit Dante's trilogy because it's been a while now. It's probably been a decade. Knowing what I know now about the paranormal and unpacking some of that. And I bet you there's value there for us.
Yeah, we've done a show recently on David Godsword's biography of just Lovecraft's vacations and its the Merrimack Valley's influence on his life and writings.
Yeah,
it's just a smaller portion of his life, but it was a neat book. But it's becomes very an educational experience to kind of go back in time, see what influenced authors, Lovecraft is, somewhat modern. I mean, with Dante, you're going back 700 years or so. But there's also, like with the Christmas Carol, that a lot of people, might be reading, start reading soon. Dickens was covering interdimensional travel.
Yeah.
You get some of the interdimensional travel mentioned in, like the start of the Book of John, and Jesus was talking about, my Father has many rooms in his mansion, and I'm going there to prepare one for you. Then I'll come back and get you. Like there's some traveling there. Like what do you mean by all these different rooms? Is that planets? What? You got some travel going on. That's kind of open to a lot of different interpretations. But even with Hawthorne and some of the imagery from the House of Seven Gables, all these authors presenting some really interesting views of paranormal events. And it's not a major feature of what we do, but I think that when we've had paranormal researchers on Nightlight, it becomes a really fascinating subject. Like what did they know that we are just learning about now?
Right. So I'll talk about it just briefly from the point of view of a writer, of a creator, and then pass it over to Tonya. Tonya just recently, and she'll talk about it more, but she just got her certification in hypnosis, and then went to the virtually just last month to the Edgar Cayce Center to get a subspecialty in past life regression and higher soul work and all of that. I had my first experience.
Thank you.
I had my first experience with that, and Tonya, as she was regressing me to a past life, she was talking a lot about imagination. That was very interesting to me. Now, I was trying to be relaxed, and I was trying to be a good client and go through the process, and it was a wonderful process. And we'll be talking about that on this Thursday night's Into the Outer Realms of past life regression and dispelling some of the myths and misunderstandings about what hypnosis and all of that is. But for a writer, I think in terms of tulpas, John Keel talks about the fact that the man who wrote The Shadow reported the shadow actually manifesting in his home, in his study where he wrote. Alan Moore, the famous graphic novelist, went to a bar and met his character, John Constantine. Stephen King plays with this trope all the time. And I think the fact that Whitley Strieber was a fiction writer, right, with The Hunger and Wolfen and all of that, is very, very interesting. So authors have this conjuring ability, right? When we write out words, what do we call it? We call it spelling. Words have power. They're incantations. They can create things. And sometimes as authors, we do it unintentionally, but physics breaks down. So you sit down to write, and the next thing you know, 10 hours have passed. And it feels like it's been 15 minutes. But this idea of our imagination, and what is imagination, right? Carlos Castaneda, whatever you think about the legitimacy of Don Juan and those teachings, they're very fascinating books. So when Don Juan says to him, imagine you're a bird, and Carlos has this experience where he's a bird and he's flying around, and he says, come on, was I really a bird? And Juan says, well, did you believe you were a bird? Did you experience it? And I think a lot of this stuff, there's that really fine line. Tonya, you want to talk about that in terms of the work you do as a medium and a hypnotist? And because I think there's more overlap is what I'm learning than we give credit to.
Yeah, definitely. And, you mentioned my getting the certification through the Edgar Cayce Foundation or the ARE. Mm-hmm. And, Edgar Cayce would say that the way to tap into your intuition is through your imagination. And I've always felt that way, even before I learned more about Edgar Cayce. That was certainly the way that I was able to tap into my intuitive and psychic abilities. And I think that they're basically the same faculty. It's just when you're, when we say we're maybe daydreaming or using our imagination, we're directing our imagination to where we want it to go. But when we're experiencing different levels of consciousness, directing our consciousness to be more receptive to things that might want to bubble up from the unconscious or things that we might want to receive from, other realms, other dimensions, spirits, what have you, it's still coming in through that faculty of the imagination. It's just that we're not now the ones directing it. It's, we're receiving more on the receiving end, if that makes sense. But I really feel like the imagination is the faculty to tap into not only your intuition, but certainly, it's what we use in hypnosis. It's really, putting those suggestions in and letting your imagination, working through visualization to convince your mind to create new patterns.
Okay. Let's stop there for just a second, and I'll come back to. But while you two have done such a great job ranting, I did look up a few more of the plants from A Midsummer Night's Dream. There's thyme, oxlips, violets mentioned. And I also noticed in Act 1, Scene 1, you get this line, your eyes are lodestars, and your tongue sweet air, more tunable than lark to shepherd's ear, when wheat is green, when hawthorn buds appear. That's it. That's exactly. I don't have the play memorized, but right there's exactly what Joey was talking about. There's the hawthorn plant tree is mentioned in Midsummer Night's Dream. Totally forgot that.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So
Shakespeare validated what's being covered on Nightlight.
Very nice. Or we're validating Shakespeare, which is nice.
Okay.
Which is very nice. All these years later, he's probably sleeping better, knowing he's been validated by us in our conversation. But plants are
Oh, did we lose you?
For a second.
Oh, okay.
Wait, no, I'm
Joey
not
was
hearing
talking
Joey.
about plants.
Yeah, I'm not hearing him. Are you?
No, I'm just hearing you. But maybe he needs to plug in some gadget. But
yeah, I think, hold on. Let me. We're in separate parts of the house, but I think I need to just let him know.
Okay, yeah, maybe Frank got a little upset with the
Joey,
technology.
You are not on your phone maybe died. You're not on the.
Oh.
We're not hearing you.
It cut off for some reason. That's very weird.
Okay, I think he's calling back in.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Yeah. Yeah, we about 6 weeks ago it was the heavy breather. Now it's the no breather.
Oh my goodness!
Okay, there he is.
Yeah, Tonya came down and said you weren't on, and I looked down and the call had been cut off.
Okay, well, you're back.
Oh my goodness! So,
yeah, you were
what was
talking
the last
about
thing you heard? Okay, so plants. So we validated Shakespeare.
Yeah, and
well, I wanted to.
Wow.
I wanted to back up just for a second on the Hawthorne Tree. So the Hawthorne Tree is also significant because it's associated with magic and enchantment, and it's also associated with Beltane, which is a spring festival. And it's considered in Celtic mythology to be sacred, probably for those reasons. So it makes sense that it would be in that play as well. It would be mentioned.
Okay. That makes perfect sense. Okay. All right. Thank you, Tonya, for putting that into perspective.
Yeah, and but still definitely tied to the fairy. So what I was saying when the spirits cut off our phone line, that was so odd. Plants are very prevalent in our work. So Tonya works with essential oils. She has a company called Outer Realms Bath and Body Works with her business partner Emily Mittermeier, who's a very accomplished paranormal investigator. She wrote the foreword for Roommates, and they're putting together field kits. So a lot of people are watching the paranormal shows on TV, and they want to go out and be amateur investigators, and it's really important to protect themselves. So as Tonya was saying, essential oils are, of course, plant extracts. Plants have their own frequencies. They're used for clearing, they're used for protection, they're used for healing, they're used for communication. Of course, our beloved friend Rosemary, who we lost last year, we always have some rosemary in our field kit, which represents remembrance. So I think Shakespeare was very tapped into those kinds of things, right? In Macbeth, he has the three witches who do the spells. He was very, very tapped into the occult, I believe. And it shows up, of course, Midsummer Night is very, very mystical, but based on the lore. So, yeah, and in our book, we tell people about different things, sage and incenses and different essential oils, lavender. So it all kind of comes full circle. So I think to be a responsible and to yourself, responsible to protect yourself and not have attachments or follow-alongs that come with you, you need to employ these things and understand how they work, like a kitchen witch would, right? Or a good old-fashioned Wiccan who understands the herbs and, of course, Native American. Medicine. Yeah.
Okay. Wait, so many different. Oh, I know what I had this note on the back part of one of my 6 pages of notes. But with our show Friday night with Normandy, I don't think I mentioned it, but it was like, well, okay, we covered so much ancient Egyptian material. Let's say the listeners got a great recreation of ancient Egypt, and I want to save this topic for the next time Normandy's a guest, but it does. One of the topics from her book does fit in with what we were just talking about with what the older authors had expressed. But she does talk about the Egyptian character, the Khaibit, Khaibit. It's mentioned in her book. It's like this earthbound shadow figure. It's kind of like a ghost or a doppelganger type character from ancient Egypt. We can continue our list of authors who documented some of these paranormal events, and go all the way back to 3000 BC or so, and it also include this K-bit character. So I just want to include that just because I overlooked it while we were talking about it. But as part of Normandy's book, this is just a really fascinating subject, getting so many different perspectives on the paranormal. And Tonya, with your degree, is that the right word, in past life regressions? Certification?
It's a certification.
Okay, certification. Okay. How is working with clientele to look at their past lives? How is that fitting in with your studies of the paranormal? Is there some kind of overlap there, or just a different angle?
I think it's all of a piece. Certainly, just understanding. If we're trying to understand the survival of consciousness after death, what does that look like? What does our lives between lives? What is that like? What does the soul experience? In between realms and immediately before birth and immediately after death. So I think, it's definitely all relevant as part of the study, particularly when we're trying to understand hauntings and, ghost. What is that? Is it a remnant of the consciousness? Is there, my belief and understanding of it is that it's the consciousness and the collective energy, you can call it a soul or what have you, of the essence of that being, that eternal part of the being, not these meat suits that we walk around in temporarily, but the eternal essence of the being itself. So I think that's how it ties in. Just exploring what is this whole experience all about.
I'm like I said, I'm far from an expert in this field. It is interesting. I'm learning about it, but it's a topic like this, remnant of consciousness connected to dealing with past life regressions. That's one of those subjects that it kind of takes me back to why are some people stuck here? Why are you get some of the passages in the Bible that you meet God on the other side, but why are some people still stuck to this one property or inside this house? it's still a little bit different from talking with a living person and going back and they were living during Elizabethan times, or they're kind of like the Highlander character. They've been the same person throughout time. They don't really. They stay on the earth.
Mhm.
It's what interests me is how do you get those characters, and then the bull who die but they never leave. It's kind of similar, but there's a little difference. I don't know. My paranormal vocabulary is not all that extensive, so I don't know if I'm using the right terms. It's just what you two bring up in these discussions is get you thinking.
Mhm.
So I don't know what I'm asking.
So I think what you might be asking, and certainly correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you might be asking, why is it that when the consciousness survives the death of the physical body, for some beings it moves on, goes through the tunnel, you know what I mean, all the things that people talk about, meets your guides and your angels, and for some beings they remain here earthbound. Is that the nature of your question?
Yes, you're phrasing it far better than I did.
Well, I just wanted to make sure that I was correct, and that's what you were asking. And what I think, and I want to back up for a second. You said you're certainly not an expert in this field, and I really don't think that anyone can claim to be an expert in the realm of the paranormal. We're all just gathering information. We're all collecting data, comparing notes. We all certainly have our theories based on our experiences, but I think it would be impossible for anyone to really claim to be an expert in any of this stuff, because nobody can claim with any kind of absolute certainty that we know anything when it comes to these things. So a lot of it is speculation. A lot of it is just personal experience. A lot of it for me is just intuition and having talked to the spirit people themselves, and certainly doing the past life regressions, what people say when they're encountering these different lives and lives between lives and what have you. But in terms of entities or beings, sentient beings who tend to remain earthbound, a lot of times it's that attachment that Joey was talking about. So they have an attachment to a location. They may have an attachment to a specific person. They may have an attachment to just any kind of material object, really. We've certainly encountered people that have had haunted furniture. In one case that we talk about in the book, there was a fireplace that a woman was attached to. It came from her home, and she was with the fireplace when it was moved to another home. So just these attachments to, material, places, things, what have you. Sometimes they're attached to people, and they're waiting around because they're not ready to cross over without their loved ones. We talk about that a little bit in Hallway, where a gentleman that I encountered in the web, he was deceased, his wife was not, and he was waiting for her. She was in a nursing home across the street. So sometimes they're just confused. They don't realize, maybe their death was sudden, it was traumatic or violent, and they just don't really realize that they've made the transition out of their body yet. And in some cases, they're just downright resentful and bitter, and they feel like they were cheated, and they just aren't going to leave. And then finally, there are cases where there are addictions involved, whether it be drugs, alcohol, but addictions to some type of substance, and they can in a sense, extract the essence of that substance from a living host, if you will. So we've encountered that as well. For example, somebody maybe really doesn't have a serious issue with alcohol. They're an occasional drinker, and then they encounter this entity that was a heavy drinker or an alcoholic in life, and they attach themselves to the person, and all of a sudden the person becomes a heavy drinker and then eventually ends up with, an alcohol issue. And we have seen that. So all different reasons why certain entities remain earthbound and choose not to cross over.
Okay. So it's that person's choice.
Yes, I think free will is always a factor. Free will factors in always. Okay. And when I'm working with spirits, I ask them, do you want to cross over? Sometimes they're absolutely happy to cross over and glad for the help, and other times they're just not ready. So I'm always respecting their free will.
Okay. That's a nice segue into one of the questions I had. Where you're in these situations where you can offer to help the spirit, do you find that there is a spiritual aspect to your investigations and writings, going out into the field? It just sounds like you're doing far more than the night in a haunted house or going to a graveyard. And there's something of far more substance in what you two do.
Thank you for pointing that out.
You.
In Roommates from Beyond, we debuted the first ever, and as we were getting the book together, Tonya and I actually came from the spiritual and moved into the paranormal, and we feel like they go hand in glove. And when we were in the web, we sort of instinctually started to say to people, do not yell at the ghosts and spirits. Do not bully them. This is not a zoo where we're coming to see the specimens. And we've seen so much of that because of the TV culture. And Rosemary talked a lot about this, especially at the end of her life, where you bully them because then they get angry and their energy spikes and you can get better readings. And Tonya and I believe that we have an obligation. So we actually created in Roommates from Beyond a paranormal Bill of Rights. It's a 10-point Bill of Rights designed for the living as well as the dead. And as paranormal, I don't usually talk about this publicly, but I'm just going to say it. I do not like the terms ghost hunting or ghost hunter. To me, it's violent and it's disrespectful. Because of all the connotations that come along with hunting. That something is prey. That is not Tonya and I's approach. First of all, in the past 11 years, we have encountered very dark things, including possessions, including true demons, things that want to cause harm, that do cause harm to the physical body, to the etheric body. So we have a great deal of respect. I often talk about the fact that when I was in my 20s, I was caught in a storm in a 26-foot sailboat in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, pretty sure that I was going to die. And that respect that you have for nature is the same respect that you need to have for the paranormal. Plus, as Tonya always says, ghosts and spirits are former human beings that are now disembodied. They have rights. They have rights to the places that they are. They have rights to express themselves. we found in the web that not only do they retain their personalities, but the personalities are malleable. They're plastic. They can change over time. A good spirit can become nasty. A nasty spirit or ghost can sort of be rehabilitated and lose some of that bitterness and go into the light and all of that. So we definitely bring the spiritual aspect in the sense that, and I'm glad you both brought up the idea of an expert. We're trying to learn as much as we can so that we can do our work as well as we can do it. As teachers, as people who are invited into people's homes, we have a huge responsibility to do right by the living and the dead. And nobody's an expert. I agree with Tonya. This is a lifetime pursuit, right? We'll probably do this till we die, like Rosemary did or John Keel did, and remain humble, because the minute that you're not humble, they will burn you. There are a lot of opportunist energies out there, and they will burn you bad. So, that's our feeling, that the spiritual keeps you grounded, that white light and the humility that comes with that.
Okay. I'm glad we had a chance to talk about both your work has been used to complete someone's life or journey, part of their journey, one stage of their journey. If they were stuck here on Earth for whatever reason. Then Joe, you were just talking about if you start having an ego, you can get burned in almost like the inverse of the helpful work that you two have done. And on one or two, three, four of the shows I've heard you do elsewhere, you've also mentioned that photo of you with your face was pixelated.
Yes.
I don't know if that.
Yeah.
In that, are we talking about you were being given a message through a photo from like a hostile entity? Maybe you want to explain more. Give the listeners more of a background. I was just wondering about a contrast of two different situations, if that is what happened.
Right. So, okay. So, and Tonya helped me with this. So this was Mothman Festival, so middle of September of 2019. And how it started was earlier in the day on Saturday, we were approached, as we often were, advice, help. Joe, a woman stopped by our table after my talk that day, and she asked Tonya and I about a portal that was on her property where some very nasty beings were coming out and causing things like cancer and sickness in their group and disruption and scaring people. And so we were talking about the nature of portals, and I looked to Tonya, as I often do, to make sure that what I was saying was sensible and that I was expressing myself correctly and I wasn't misleading this woman. And I looked over at Tonya, and she had a look of absolute horror on her face. Because why, Tonya?
So in that instant that Joey turned to look at me, Joey has brown eyes, and they were red. I mean, like red, like the reddest red that I could even. I'm at a loss to describe how red they were. They were so red, but it was just the irises. So it wasn't like the the white part was red. Just the irises were red, and I practically jumped out of my seat. And it was just for a split second. I almost screamed. Joey looked at me like, what, are you crazy? He didn't understand why I was jumping. And then they went back to normal. So we have no idea what that was.
Right. So later that day, the festival is over for the day, and we were all going to go down to the TNT area where the igloos are, and that's the prime gathering place. And over the past 11 years, we've been there lots and lots of times. Tonya chose not to go because there were some disturbing entities, shadow people in a black mask that we had seen down there, and some things going on. And her intuition was saying, I don't need to be there. So she decided not to go. But I went with some of my colleagues, and I guess you've seen the photo, Mark. It's we had lots of people analyze it because we, as we often do, we're taking pictures of each other for memorabilia and as part of our investigative record. And there's, I think, 8 or 9 of us, maybe 10 of us in that photo. There are no shadows coming that would explain it. And it's like a black rectangle was placed over my face. We got some help from the other side from Rosemary Guiley. She's still in contact with us and helping us in our work and continuing to be a mentor, for which we're deeply grateful and humbled. And Rosemary said that sometimes things are trying to use us. And of course, it's the old Mothman prophecies thing. You noticed, and they noticed that you noticed, and they're opportunists. So maybe it was the portal discussion we were having. Maybe I was up too late Friday night and didn't quite get enough sleep, and I was a little vulnerable. But something passed through. Something was toying with my energy field, and it was. I don't want to go into the details because it's kind of a private matter, but some of the people who we think were doing some things to cause some of the disruptions and some of the dark entities in that area knew that we knew, and we had some experiences. So they may have just been toying with us and playing with my energy field and doing different things. Not everyone is using this knowledge for good and light reasons, right? We all know that. There's all kinds of people on the spectrum for everything that we do in life. And so I wish I had an answer. I would probably sleep a little better. I don't believe that I was possessed. I don't believe it was anything that I was doing. I wasn't up to anything nefarious then or now. It certainly seemed that something was getting into my etheric body in my energy field, and as so often happens because cameras operate on different spectrums and work with light and composition and things like that differently than our eyeball does as a human eye, these things show up. So Tonya not only saw the red eyes, but then that night, my face is just completely blacked out in that photo. And we've had a lot of people analyze it. And if you analyze the shadows, nobody else, even if they're facing the same direction as me, there's nothing else. It's just there. So that's, I guess you put that in the creepy column, right? That's uncomfortable. And that's why I say we have to be super careful and we have to remain humble, or bad things can happen.
Okay. Tonight, if people are looking for a summary of tonight's show, I think through what you've both of you have published solely or jointly, you've really made you've differentiated yourselves between what we mentioned earlier about the TV shows that seem to be more sensational, get ratings, get another season. You're not doing that. I think your answers have been more about doing the right thing. Do you feel like this paranormal investigations has been a calling?
Anya?
That's a great question. I guess I've never thought about it in those terms, but if I look back over my life, certainly I could look at it that way. Having had experiences from a very young age, not always seeing ghosts, but certainly sensing and hearing them. And then, of course, my grandmother was a psychic medium who was very much into all things metaphysical and into the occult, and so taught me a little bit then. And, of course, just all of the haunted homes that I've lived in and our experience in Point Pleasant, it all seems to have been pointing in this direction if I look back at it. So certainly I think my calling, my path, what I consider my path in life is teaching and helping others. And it happens to be in this particular realm, in the realm of energy, in the realm of spirit and spirituality. So, yeah, I think that's a great question. I've never thought of it that way, but I'm glad you asked.
Yeah, it's like, Barbara and I, may have had more, calling to be teachers. Like there's really not much of a market for someone like me that comes on Tuesday nights and talks about Mothman. Shakespeare was not the author of the plays. UFOs. It's kind of hard to get employment talking about topics like that. But teaching seems to. You probably hear a lot of teachers say, it was a calling, but you try to find your little niche, and it's just interesting to hear how if you're. Some people said like alien abductions can occur in several generations of families. Maybe this kind of calling isn't. It is more of passed on, where you just can't escape. It's like genetics; you just can't escape it. It's similar to. Probably, Barbara and I, being having careers as teachers, because both of you are excellent writers, and you're conveying information about your experiences. And even with your Tonya and your intuition book. Sorry, I don't have the title in front of me, but you're teaching there too.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
I would just say quickly, because I know we're getting short on time. Our entire lives changed in a split second when we saw that interdimensional being in 2009, and it does seem down in Point Pleasant.
The one that crossed the road.
Yes.
Yes.
And that was literally a split second. Now we had 2 hours of missing time, and we've it's a topic for another time, and we recently did our own show on it. But we wound up in a parallel dimension with some very interesting creatures and some very, very interesting, provocative experiences in that 2 hours. But we say 2 hours, in air quotes, because it didn't feel that way. So I say, in a split second, our entire lives changed, and we went and talked to Bob Landrum, who's since passed, who owned a shop in Point Pleasant, who called John Frick. He and his brother called Rosemary. Rosemary called Steve. And through that linkage, that's how we met you. And that's how our lives are more and more. All I can say is with each passing year and now each passing month, our work with the paranormal is taking more and more and more of our time and putting us in front of more and more people and introducing us to more people. So in that way, I still sometimes, Mark, have to pinch myself and say, I can't believe we're talking about this, and I can't believe we've written books, and I can't believe people are listening and invite us back as you have and listen to us for hours on end. Our own show, we just did our 40-second. It's mind-boggling. So on that level, I feel like it happened to us rather than, I decided when I was a kid that I wanted to be a writer and actor. I went to school for it. Like you said, there's no schooling, there's no market for what we do. So in that sense, it was a calling. It was decided for us, and we've answered that call. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we are down to about the last minute. Do you want to plug everything, websites and Amazon, and we'll wrap it up. I just want to thank you, Tonya and Joey, for being guests, and plug everything, and we'll call it a night.
Miss Tonya?
Sure. So our books are available on Amazon, and the latest book, of course, Roommates from Beyond, How to Live in a Haunted Home, our book about the Webb Memorial Library, Watch Out for the Hallway, and then my book about cultivating your own intuition is called Living the Intuitive Life, and all of those are available on Amazon. You can find Joey and I on Facebook on our Into the Outer Realms page, and we have a weekly show that airs on that page on Facebook Thursdays, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. You can find me on Facebook, Tonya Madia Medium, and Joey is on Facebook at just Joey Madia. Okay.
Well, thank you so much. We're down to just a few seconds. Appreciate you two being guests, wonderful guests tonight, and we'll see everyone tomorrow and Thursday and Friday as well. Thank you so much, and have a great week.